Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 978 for November 13th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
The book is about the sweet spot of quality and value. But what's changed this time, looking at many more rye whiskies, which has exploded as a category and seems to me to be offering fabulous value.
Whisky is a cultural product, and this is an idea of looking at whisky in relation to people, community, history, etc., etc.
It's Book Club Week on WhiskyCast. Ian Buxton is out with the 5th edition of 101 Whiskies to Try Before You Die, and Dave Broom's latest book is A Sense of Place, looking at Scotch whiskey's role in the life of Scotland. I'll talk with both Ian and Dave later on WhiskyCast in depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more, all on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a Thanksgiving message from Robin Redbreast.
What am I thankful for? Being on the smaller end of the bird scale.
Happy Thanksgiving from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella here with Dewar's Scotch Whisky, bringing you the perfect gift idea for the holidays or any occasion. How about a Dewar's custom label or personalized bottle? More in a bit.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. After last week's acquisition spree, things settled down this week. The big announcement came out of Jack Daniel's, which unveiled its first American Single Malt whiskey several months earlier than first expected. The brand had planned to bring out a single malt next June in travel retail, but U.S. consumers will get first crack at the twice-barreled American Single Malt. It's matured in ex-bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks and will be bottled at barrel strength. It'll carry a price tag of around $70 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Also out of Tennessee, Uncle Nearest is expanding its portfolio in the rye whiskey business with not just one, but 3 new releases. The Uncle Nearest Straight Rye starts out in Canada and is matured in New York for at least 4 years before being moved to Tennessee for final maturation in used Uncle Nearest barrels. It'll be rolling out nationally over the next few weeks with a recommended retail price of $59 a bottle. Look for a black label version and a single barrel rye in the coming weeks. The Irish Whiskey Awards were handed out Thursday night in Dublin. Ecklandville Distillery's Dunville's 21-year-old Palo Cortado sherry cask finish single cask was named the best overall whiskey of the year and also won best single cask whiskey 12 years and older. Pierce Lyon's Genesis was named the best new Irish whiskey, Redbreast 27 the best cask strength whiskey, and Teeling's single pot still chestnut PX cask won the best single cask 11 years and younger. Those are just a few of the winners. In other news, Bardstown Bourbon Company is expanding into downtown Louisville. The brand experience, as it's being called, will include a bar and lounge along with a retail shop and classroom space for tastings. It'll be located at 730 West Main Street in the heart of downtown's Whiskey Row. The move comes after Kentucky state lawmakers approved legislation earlier this year allowing distilleries to open satellite tasting rooms. And at the eastern end of Whiskey Row, Angel's Envy has released its 2022 cask strength bourbon. It's the 11th annual release in the series and comes in at 59.9% ABV. I received a sample the other day, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
No live webcast this Friday night. I'll be in Fredericton, New Brunswick for the New Brunswick Spirits Festival. Listen for special coverage from Fredericton next time around. If you missed Friday night's live webcast with John Campbell of Lochlea Distillery, the on-demand replay is available right now at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. In addition to the New Brunswick Spirits Festival, this weekend also brings Whiskies of the World in Seattle on the 19th, along with the Nottingham Whiskey Festival in England. Whiskey Live Singapore is on the 19th and 20th. Whiskey Fest Las Vegas makes its debut on December 22nd at the Resorts World Resort, and Whiskies of the World wraps up the year in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, December 10th. The Victoria Whiskey Festival kicks off the year January 19th through the 22nd in Victoria, British Columbia. If you have a whiskey event coming up, please let us know about it. We'll add it to the searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. It's brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
Hey friends, Gabriel Cardarella here again from Dewar's. The holidays are right around the corner. That time of year where each of us are looking for that perfect bottle of whiskey to celebrate with our friends and family. This year at Dewar's, we're making things extra special by offering personalized bottles of Dewar's or custom Dewar's labels. Just visit Dewar's.com and create your custom label or personalized bottle, and we'll ship it right to you or a special person. This year, let's celebrate the holidays with a bottle of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. There are a lot of whiskey books to choose from as we head into the holiday season. I thought we'd feature a couple of the new entries this week, starting with the latest edition of Ian Buxton's 101 Whiskies to Try Before You Die. I sat down with Ian over beers at a Philadelphia pub the other day. So first off, let's talk about the latest edition of 101 Whiskies to Try Before You Die.
Well, thanks, Mark. Yes, remarkably, this is the 5th edition of that little book, which has surprised and delighted everyone, but it seems to have found a home, seems to have found an audience, so now we're on to the 5th edition.
What's new in this edition?
Well, the whole philosophy of the book hasn't changed. The book is about the sweet spot of quality and value. But what's changed this time, looking at many, many more rye whiskies, which has exploded as a category and seems to me to be offering fabulous value, and quite a few more blended whiskies. So I've freshened up all of the entries. Even if an entry is carried over from the previous edition, they've all been fully revised, but a number of new whiskies in there, and some world whiskies as well. So there's an exciting variety for people to look at.
Anything stand out among the crowd?
Well, of course it's 101 whiskies, so they all had to be standout whiskies to make the cut. For me, one of the big changes has been the value that many blended whiskies are now offering, particularly sort of premium 12 and 18-year-old blends. I've been excited by that.
I know that you were over here on a trip for Dewar's, and they've just finished upgrading their 12-year-old. You've had the chance to taste it, as have I. I was impressed by it, and I'm assuming you were as well.
Yeah, well, full disclosure, as they say. Dewar's kindly brought me over, and that was because I had been saying some things about the new Dewar's 12-year-old. Now, up till now, Dewar's 12 has not been in the book. That's not because I didn't like it. That's not because the old Dewar's 12 wasn't a excellent whiskey, but there are so many contenders it was hard to find space. This new Dewar's 12 really is a step change. I described it to them as being like a rocket booster to that blend, and so they were kind enough to bring me over. Talking about the new Dewar's 12, which you've tasted and been impressed by, The big difference has been to do all the marrying in first fill bourbon. And the basic blend recipe, as I understand it, hasn't changed. But just that change has been spectacular in terms of rounding out that whiskey. So if you like the old Dewar's 12, and why wouldn't you, you're going to get more of everything that was there before delivered in a punchier package.
You talked about the value in blended scotches. A lot of folks look down on them, and I don't think that's a good idea at all, but they really do offer a good value for the money, don't they?
Well, I think so. And just staying with that Dewar's 12, if you're going to age that whiskey in first fill bourbon, you're incurring, as a producer, a substantial extra cost, because you'll know, and the listeners will know, that quality barrels are just that much more expensive. But what I'm impressed by is the way that Dewar's have sucked up that cost. They've invested in the brand, so the retail price of the new first fill in bourbon Dewar's 12 hasn't moved 1 single cent. All that extra cost has been swallowed up by the brand to bring extra value on the shelf to you, the consumer. And that, you asked about a standout product, that would definitely be a standout for me.
What else is impressing you about the whiskey world these days? You mentioned the growth in rye whiskeys, for an example.
Seeing some exciting rye whiskeys. The other thing that's I've been greatly struck by, and has been very, very good for the whole industry, has been the arrival of really, really spectacularly good whiskeys from around the world. And I'm thinking, what pops into my mind right now is a whiskey from Finland, for goodness sake. Finland, called Tiranpili, from the town of Lahti. Is someone in the middle of Finland. They've been distilling for a few years now, and they really are coming on song with some spectacular drams.
Who else is coming along strong?
Starward from Australia. I guess many people have heard about that. They got a ton of money from the Diageo venture capital fund, and they put that to very, very good use. And they're innovating with cask finishes, coming forward with some exciting and distinctive whiskies. And the good thing about the Starwards of this world, or the Milk and Honey from Israel, or the Tiranpili from Finland, is it forces all the other established producers, the Diageos of this world, the Dewar's of this world, the Chivas brothers of this world, to look over their shoulder and raise their game. And that is only for the good of all of us drinkers.
What's driving you nuts about the whiskey world these days?
Well, price increases and this pernicious idea that you can invest in a cask of whiskey and make a rock-solid guaranteed return. I can say for sure my pension fund is not going anywhere near a cask of new whiskey.
Nor is mine.
Well said, sir, because this is going to end badly. It's going to end in tears.
We're talking about a Patterson's level crash, aren't we?
Well, and not just Patterson's. We saw this repeated later in the 20th century as well. And because one or two people a few years ago got very, very lucky with some casks that they bought by chance from the right distillery, and then have seen a spectacular return, and I wouldn't deny that. I think some people have done fabulously well. The idea that can now be repeated again and again is for the birds. It's going to end very badly.
Ian Buxton's 5th edition of 101 Whiskies to Try Before You Die is available now in the UK and Europe. It'll officially be released in the US on January 3rd, but you can pre-order it now online or through your local independent bookseller. You can also order Dave Broom's newest book, A Sense of Place, now. It was published the other day, and while it's not a companion book to the film The Amber Light, there are a lot of similarities. It's a change of pace from the usual whiskey book.
Yes, it is, and deliberately so, Mark. What I want to do was look at kind of wider issues around whiskey. For a long time, I've always been conscious that whiskey is a cultural product. And this is an idea of looking at whiskey in relation to people, community, history, etc., etc.
So a sense of place is really something more than just whiskey in this case, right?
Very much so. Yeah, it's about conditions. It's about why why Scotland grows barley, why Scotland makes whiskey. It's about community and the role that distilleries play within communities. It's about identity and identity and attachment to place. It's also about sustainability because as the Scotch whisky industry, as all whisky industries, grasp this idea of sustainability. So the local becomes more important. And the local then becomes part of the identity of the whisky as well. So it was really interesting, talking to distillers from non-classic countries. The very first thing they say is, we're not Scotch, for example. And one of the backups that they then provide is to say, well, we're going to use what grows around us. We're going to find out where we're from and have a whiskey that represents, where we are and what our culture is and what our food culture is, what our conditions are, etc. And it's something that Scotch had and has always been there. And I think is now rediscovering. And it was very interesting looking at new distilleries, which I visit in the book, and how central that is to their whole DNA. So that's kind of what this whole idea of place is about. It's a remarkably big and complex web of things. Yeah.
One might suspect from the title that you'd embraced the terroir movement.
Well, yes, you would. I think terroir is too narrow a term to apply in this case. Terroir for me really applies to the land itself and to the flavours which are produced by grapes, for example, in one vineyard, or conceivably barley or other ingredients for whiskey. And I think place is a much wider and I think more relevant way of looking at it, because place involves people. People, work and place. All of these together bring about culture. So I think I'm not wholly knocking the idea of terroir, but I think this goes deeper than terroir because the human element and the cultural element is there.
You introduce us in this book to a lot of people that would not be featured in traditional whiskey books. The head of the Brodgar Trust, a perfumer from Edinburgh. What do these folks bring to the whiskey world that we need to pay attention to?
The reason I wanted to speak to all of these people, as a glassblower, as a cabinet maker, boat builder, farmers, Imogen, the amazing perfumer, etc., is because there are really interesting parallels in terms of their approach to their craft and their art, and the art and craft of making whiskey as well. It's something I touched on in, I suppose, the previous volume in this, what appears to be now a series in Japan. And I've always found it very interesting, sort of looking at the way in which other people look at their conditions and their raw materials, shall we say, and the way in which they approach their art and craft, and really see how the way in which whiskey is made and the way in which what whiskey's role is in a community and places is mirrored by that as well. Imogen, for example, the great perfumer, her inspiration is the landscape and the rocks and the aromas of Scotland. The John Galvin, the incredible cabinet maker, who does a lot of work with whiskey companies. Talking to him about Scottish oak and then extending that into what Greg Glass is doing with the Scottish Oak Project. All of this begins to tie together. We're so used to thinking about whiskey as just being sitting there in its own little bubble, and it's not influenced by anything else exterior to it. And it's not true. Whiskey is part of life, and its influences and its ripples and its tendrils reach out across a whole multiplicity of different areas.
You take pains in the introduction to say this is not the book about the Amber Light, but yet there's a lot of inspiration from the movie in there.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. I would say that the idea for this book, I first pitched a similar idea for this about over 10 years ago. And I'm very glad I didn't write it then, because I think the way in which the whiskey industry has moved allows this book to be a lot deeper and hopefully to people a lot more interesting. And that idea of whiskey as a cultural product then fed into the Amber Light. So kind of the idea of the book was kind of there. Amber Light came along and was looking at it really in terms of this kind of pure reference and link between Scotland, whiskey and writing and music, etc., etc. And then the sense of place perhaps echoes some of the themes in the Amber Light, but again kind of widens things out in a completely different way.
What's the takeaway from the book? What's the one thing that people are going to learn that they didn't know about whiskey and Scotland and the Scottish culture? What's the one thing they're going to take away from this?
The one thing they're going to take away from this, hopefully the one thing that they'll take away from it is how deeply embedded whiskey is and has been within Scottish culture and Scotland as a whole. There's quite a bit of history. We go from north to south. We start in Orkney, we finish in Islay. But we also go from the past to the future, I would like to think. And there's an awful lot of whiskey history that's kind of overlooked or has become mythologized and perhaps wrongly written about as well. So there's a lot about the early days from the Gaelic whiskey culture. And I think maybe one of the big takeaways of the book, and one of the big takeaways for me, was this sense of real optimism and this sense of a new creativity opening up within the world of Scotch whiskey, which is paralleled by whiskey around the world. And those new distillers and the established distillers, perhaps going back to this idea or drawing from this idea of place and location and community, and that is what's going to be taking Scotch whisky forward. So in many ways, although I didn't set out to do it, the book is kind of taking the temperature of where the Scotch whisky industry is at the moment and what it's going to be in the 21st century.
What's your take? What is the state of the industry today?
I think we're in a very good place. I think, and this is something I chatted with Dr. Emma Walker at Johnny Walker, and what Emma was saying was that, if you think about the 19th century, the 19th century is kind of an era of an industry beginning to establish itself. How do we do this? The beginning of the 20th century is about technology and scale and engineering and, getting all the equipment in. The latter part of the 20th century is about science and people like Emma, pulling whiskey apart and seeing how it works. But with all of that in place now, with the industry established, with knowing how to make it, with understanding the science, now we're in a phase of wonderful creativity because all of that is known. And I find it really fascinating that with all of that being known, this is where you've got all these wonderful new opportunities for this thing called whiskey by looking at flavour, looking at barley varieties, looking at re-establishing links with farmers, re-establishing links with foresters, using different yeasts, different techniques of aging, etc., etc. We're in a hugely creative phase of Scotch whisky's evolution, and place is sitting right at the heart of it.
Thanks to Dave Broom and Ian Buxton for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the latest release from the Dalmore. Luminary Edition No. 1 Rare goes on the auction block at Sotheby's in London this week. That one is a one-of-a-kind 48-year-old single malt, but there's a companion 15-year-old edition that I had the chance to taste. It's finished in a combination of Amarone red wine casks and specially made kintsugi casks that include wood from Scottish Tay Oak, Japanese Mizunara, and American White Oak. It's bottled at 46.8% ABV, and the nose is fruity and vibrant. You'll find touches of citrus, honey, almonds, and ginger. The taste starts off with dark chocolate fudge, followed by hints of cherries, citrus, gingerbread, and figs. The finish is long with dried fruits and honey, subtle spices, and hints of cocoa powder and toasted oak. It's excellent, and I'm scoring the Dalmore Luminary No. 1 Collectible 2022 edition a 95. Lochlea Distillery's John Campbell joined us on the Happy Hour live webcast the other night, and I had the chance to taste Lochlea's Our Barley release the other day. It's matured in a combination of first fill ex-bourbon barrels, Oloroso sherry casks, and STR wine barriques, and it's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is malty and grassy with touches of butterscotch, honey, and dried flowers. The taste is fruity and floral with notes of barley sugar, honey, dried flowers, and a hint of lemon zest. The finish is long and sweet with barley sugar and just a hint of honeysuckle. I'm scoring Lochlea's Our Barley Single Malt a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you each week by Sagamore Spirit, a 100-time award-winning Maryland-style rye whiskey. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, Sagamore's team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature Double Oak, Cask Strength, or Reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye. Please drink responsibly. India's Paul John Whiskey is out with its 2022 Christmas edition single malt. This year's release comes from a combination of unpeated whiskey matured in ex-bourbon casks and peated whiskey matured in Oloroso and brandy casks. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has notes of baked apples and peaches, dry spices, a hint of baking chocolate, honey, and vanilla. The taste has a mild peatiness along with touches of orange peel, dark chocolate, and white pepper. And the finish has touches of plums, dark chocolate, and a hint of hazelnut. It's a nice holiday whiskey. I'm scoring the Paul John 2022 Christmas edition a 93. Finally, let's look at the Jack Daniel's twice-barreled American Single Malt. My sample was bottled at 52.9% ABV. The nose has touches of tobacco leaves, leather, charred oak, and cherry cola. The taste is full of black pepper, cherry cola, charred oak, and old leather. The finish is long with, once again, cherry cola and charred oak. It does not taste like a single malt, even though it's made with 100% malted barley. Must be the terroir in Lynchburg. I'm scoring the Jack Daniel's twice-barreled American Single Malt a 90. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,400 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus, Isla's Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. We celebrated our 17th anniversary of the very first WhiskyCast episode on Saturday, and thanks to everyone who posted notes on social media. Just to share a few of them, from Jerry O'Sullivan at Pogues1977 on Twitter, congratulations on 17 years of the best whiskey podcast, and one of the best podcasts bar none. Here's to the next 17 years, Sláinte. Thank you, Jerry. From Dylan Ettinger at Dylan R. Ettinger on Twitter, always a great listen. Thank you for all your work and everything you do for the whiskey community. Thank you, Dylan. Jeff Burlatt, a longtime listener, posted this on the WhiskyCast Facebook page. Been there from the beginning. Has been the most educational show I have listened to. Kirk Pearson posted this on the Facebook page. The best whiskey podcast! ! Your tasting notes have led to a lot of new bottles in my collection. Happy anniversary and Sláinte. Thank you, Kirk. And finally, from Scott Mansfield on Facebook, We got an iPod as a wedding present. One of the first things I did was look for something on whiskey to listen to. I found WhiskyCast. 17 years later, I'm still listening. Loved the whole journey. Congratulations. Thank you, Scott. Once again, I want to thank every one of you for listening over the years. Without your support, it would not be possible for us to keep producing WhiskyCast each week. I also need to thank all of our sponsors, past and present, who help us keep the bills paid. And I really need to thank my family, especially the boss, Christina Filburn, the brains behind the whole business. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find me on social media. Just look for WhiskyCast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or you can email me. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Islay Single Malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Isla's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. If you're a lover of peaty whiskeys, you've probably heard the term ppm, or parts per million of phenols. But how do they determine ppm? Well, it's done using a colorimeter, which measures the amount of light that passes through a solution, and it picks up on the amount of smokiness in the sample. But there are many different ways and times to calculate ppm, as John Campbell of Lochlea Distillery told us the other night on the Happy Hour live webcast.
You would do it in the malt, so you would find out how much smoke you've got in the malted barley that you'll start your process with. You'd also do it in the spirit as well. And each distillery will have maybe even different levels of parts per million flavour in the malt, and they'll get different parts per million flavour in the spirit, just because of where you take the cuts. So, for example, I guess, let's just use the south end of Islay as a good example, because you've got Lefroy, Lagavulin and Ardbeg there, and I know this region very well. So like in Lefroy, you'd have something like 45 to 50 in the malt, and you'd get like low 20s in the spirit, so like half. Just because we cut later and deeper than kind of any other distillery. Lagavulin, they'd be running about 40, and they would get something like 15. Ardbeg would be up about 50 in the malt, and they would get maybe like 18 or 20 in the spirit as well. So like, just because you've got a lot in your malt doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be straight through to your spirit.
By the way, Lochlea will be releasing its first peated cask whiskey in January. Unlike whiskeys made using peated barley, this one is made with unpeated barley, but it's matured in ex-Lefroy casks. Of course, John was at Lefroy for 27 years before leaving a year ago this month to join Lochlea. Thanks again to John Campbell for the explanation. And if you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
Friends, it's Gabe again, reminding you that one of the best gifts you can give this year is one that's double-aged. Visit Dewar's.com and create a custom label or a bottle of our 12-year, 15, or our 18-year and give a gift they'll never forget. Stay curious, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, Tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.